And we are live, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to episode 140 of the Sling'N podcast. I'm TJ.
And I'm Kent.
And I'm TC.
And joining tonight, once again, back in the hot seat, is a dear friend of the show, and Kent and I personally, of course, Dr. TC Fuller. Excuse me, Doc. TC, how the hell are you, man?
If I was any better, I'd be violating policy, sir. How are you?
You know what? I can get on board with that, dude. Let's violate all the policies. Hashtag demonetization. But anyway, so TC, it's not your first time on the show, but it has been a while. So for any of the new listeners that we have, why don't you go ahead and take a moment and introduce yourself, sir?
All right. Well, my name's Dr. TC Fuller. I'm a Taurus. I'm from California. I enjoy long walks on the beach. I actually am from California. I learned to shoot in California, I guess, which is probably a testament as to how old I actually am. Went to college out there, did my undergrad at Fresno State, was a member of the California Army National Guard in Visalia, which is a thriving metropolis south of Fresno. If you can find that on the map, I applaud you. From there, I went on active duty as a regular Army infantry officer, did that for several years, was headed for the Berlin Brigade, landed in Germany, got sent to the Gulf War. Was a platoon leader for that little dust up. Came back, finished up my time in Europe. About a year before I rotated home, I was a victim of the Army's program they called branch detail. So I was moved from the infantry, without having volunteered, mind you, over to the Ordnance Corps. I was not a big fan of that. I didn't really want to be a maintenance officer. So I applied for Special Forces training. I applied for explosive ordnance disposal training. Basically jumped out of the plane and pulled the first parachute that opened, and it turned out to be EOD. So I was able to go to EOD school, finish that up, and was sent right back to the Middle East. Lived in Egypt for about a year, finished up my time there, came back to Fort Bragg, got another command there. About a year and a month after I got there, I went out of the Army and into the FBI. Spent 20 years in the FBI. Typical government. I asked to go to San Francisco or San Diego or Sacramento, and they sent me to Burlington, Vermont. And I was up in Vermont for 10 years and was up in upstate New York for a couple of years after that. Then managed to transfer down to the FBI's Academy, the Firearms Training Unit. And I spent 5 years or so there teaching at the schoolhouse on how to pull triggers, how to do the thing with the thing, Kent. And then went up to FBI headquarters, and I did about a year there in the Office of Congressional Affairs. So I worked on Capitol Hill.
And there's a lot of affairs in Congress.
A lot of affairs. I'm
sorry. I was like, don't step on his intro, but you know what? I just had to. There's so many affairs.
And then from there, went to Charlotte, North Carolina, and I finished up in Charlotte at the end of 2017 and retired. And now I live outside of Charlotte. I run a little consulting and training organization, write some books. Every now and then I go to a shooting class and sort of loving life. And that brings you up to date.
Outstanding, man. And I have it on good authority that Dr. Fuller is an excellent snuggler.
Well, I don't like to brag, but,
Oh, my goodness.
My youngest child is 5 now, so clearly I'm a process guy, not a results guy.
That's a shooting coaching joke and a sex joke. That's awesome. So, TC,
speed guy. I couldn't resist. Guys, it's a location thing. You had to be there.
I'm speed guy. You don't understand. I'm speed guy. One of these days, that dude will actually watch this podcast and know that he said
and get
something
very upset with us.
Yeah, he said something in a gun class that TJ, the AI, would never let him live down for 100 years. I'm speed.
Well, then you need to have him on the show. Get out ahead of that, man.
Yeah. We might have to do that. So, man, TC, it's good to have you back on here. Y'all, so there's not really a super duper agenda to this other than talking to a smarter, older gentleman than ourselves about his time in the FBI. And I've got some pointed FBI firearms unit academy trainee stuff that I'd like to talk about.
I'm happy to talk about it if I know about it. If I don't, I'll tell you I don't know.
Well, there you go. And of course, TC is recently published his 2.75 book. Right, he's published 2 3/4 of a book or something like that. He's got out a gun book for cops, and he's got out a book of memoirs of the FBI. And we'll let him do his, when it's time to promo his books and talk through them in depth, rather than stepping on them and ruining the thunder, I'll just let him talk through them.
Well, I'm happy to talk about that all you want, brother.
Yeah, man. So let's see, TJ, before we do that, what's your life update? What do you got going on? What is that shirt? What? He's from.
So dead. It's from a company. It's a company called Sling'N.
Okay. Let me die. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, in my gi. Yeah. Same company.
Oh,
actually,
I thought it said "Let me die in my 6'1".
No.
What's the 6'1"? Let me die in my gi.
Yeah, let me die in my gi. Yeah.
Okay.
So get back into training stuff. Got a local tournament coming up. I'm hoping. So I kind of had a bit of a hot ginger summer, and I let my diet go and just tried to enjoy my summer and gained a little bit of weight back. So I'm trying to cut a little bit of weight off so I can get ready for a tournament in November. So here's hoping for that. Meanwhile, do you guys want to see what I irresponsibly spend adult money on?
Oh my God, TC, yeah. Say yes. Say yes.
Okay.
Oh my God.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Still, hold on.
This is okay. So for y'all audio listeners, which is fucking all of you, thousands of you will hear this, dozens of you will see this, and I just don't care. This might be the best text message I've received from my buddy in like fucking 10 years. It's worth the wait and the build up. We'll see if TC recognizes it when TJ manages to get it on screen. But when he told me the amount of money he spent, yeah, you got to zoom out a little bit, brother. Back up with it. You see what that is, TC?
I do see what that is, and that is old school right there, brother. That might be the last movie I stood in line to see.
This might help.
Yeah. Don't cross the streams, Egon. I thought you said that was bad.
Nope.
Dude,
no.
The sound that you're hearing is a 1-to-1 replica cosplay Ghostbusters backpack.
That's
complete with lights and fucking. I'm telling the audience. I know you get it, but they're over there like, what is the sound? I don't know what the sound is. TJ bought a fucking Ghostbusters backpack.
It is a proton pack. Thank you very much.
Okay. I'm so sorry. Jeez.
Okay, good. You know, Egon, don't cross the streams. That's bad.
That's right. That's a big ass Twinkie.
Oh, sure. Some guy blows his nose and you want to keep it.
Yep. I collect spores, mold, and fungus.
Oh my God. We're stuck in this.
Yeah.
Now.
Yeah, but no. So this is the valuable lesson that I learned through the purchase or the acquisition of this amazing piece of 80s nostalgia. The pinnacle of adulthood is when you have a true appreciation for the nostalgic joy that you felt as a child for some of those toys or shows or things that you enjoyed, and the disposable income to buy the adult toy equivalent of those same pieces of your history.
Hey, as a kid, I went to a very expensive all-male college prep school, and I was myself and my buddy Hector were kind of the token poor kids in the school, and we upheld our end of the bargain quite well. And TC stands for Troy Christopher, so it was rather humorous to our English teacher that 2 kids named Troy and Hector were good friends, right? Especially since we were reading the Iliad. But we used to play the Pac-Man pinball game, and we did so well at it that we would rack up games and then sell them to the other kids that were waiting at this place where the game was for their train, so they could take their train home because they commuted on trains. And we would then take the money we won, split it, and invest some back into winning more games, and some we'd go and buy food because we were hungry. Well, fast forward 25 years later, Hector is now Dr. Hector, MD, married to Dr. Carey, MD, and they own a concierge medicine practice in Southern California. He calls me up one day. He's like, dude, guess what I did? Like, I have no idea. What did you do? He says, I bought a Pac-Man pinball game and put it in the garage. It's like, okay, that's awesome. I'm coming to visit. So
Yeah,
I
he bought the
feel you on that,
Pac-Man
TJ.
pinball.
And he has it to this day. It's out in his garage. He plays all the time.
So there's a buddy of mine at work is an absolute like ghost. Like I am a Ghostbusters fan. This dude takes it to a whole nother level. I love this guy to death. He's a great buddy of mine. But he calls me. He goes, "Hey man, you got a minute?" I'm like, "Oh God, what now?" I'm thinking something happened at work, like because I do incident response stuff. So I'm thinking,
bail him out.
He usually, yeah. Well, he usually hits me up when he hears it because his division, the team that he works in, often hears about incidents first because they integrate directly with our client base. And he goes, no. This is not work related. This is completely personal. I'm like, okay, hit me. He goes, do you have $300 that you can spend on yourself right now? I'm like, I think so. Yeah, I think I can manage that. He goes, here's a link. Get them while you can because they're not going to make a lot of these. And he sent me the link, and my wife happened to be down here. I was like, honey, Ghostbuster for the rest of my life, for every Halloween from now until the day I die. She's like, okay. So I ordered it, and it came in the mail this week, and I was very, very happy. I immediately took a video of it and sent it to Kent.
Yeah, it's important. My wife has a rule that if it's going to be over $400, we have to discuss it. And I'm like, really? That much? I didn't think I had that kind of latitude, but since I do, to Dan Brady's point, he asked if I have a flamethrower yet. Stand by.
Yeah, that's a lot of leeway.
That's a lot of leeway, right? It's probably twice as much as I thought I had.
Okay.
Like Napoleon says, right? Never.
And speaking of which,
when they are making a mistake.
No kidding. And speaking of which, the chat is already letting questions roll in. You can probably guess who these are from if you can't see them yourself. Ask TC if he has a flamethrower yet.
On the way, brother. On the way. As soon as she said that, I was like,
or a Rolex.
Yeah, there's the Rolex issue. Yeah, there's a story there, and I want to thank you, Dan, for bringing that up.
Can't be getting no Rolexes with 400.
No, that's an old story. That's a Afghanistan story right there, which I'm happy to tell if you really want to hear it.
Yeah, I do. Yep. Go ahead. Please proceed.
Yeah, this is an ex-wife story. So I'm getting ready to go to Afghanistan. I'm in the FBI at this point. I'm going to Afghanistan with the FBI, and I start doing some back of the envelope math with what it's going to pay, and I'm going to get my regular pay. I'm going to get, I have to do 10 hours a week of overtime that I don't get overtime pay for. So I had a 50-hour work week. It's like every other special agent in the FBI. But after I hit 50 hours, every hour after that was overtime. And I was going to be paid 16 hours a day, 7 days a week while I was in Afghanistan. So I was like, wow, start doing the math. That works out pretty well. Oh, and then they're going to give me a 25% bump for substandard housing and a 25% bump for danger pay. And I'm like, ooh, this math starts to work out real well in my favor. So I tell my wife, I said, look, I'm going to be gone a couple months. All I want to do when I get back, I'm going to make a lot of money here by our standards, at least. All I want when I get back is a Rolex Submariner. Not even a high-end one, just a nice plain black one, silver stainless steel band. Nothing to write home about, right? Very simple. And in my mind, elegant watch. To which her response was, yeah, sure, okay. I go, I survive, I come back, nary a scratch upon me. And I said, all right, let's take a look at the bank account. Let's go get my what? Where's the money? Well, as it turns out, we're living in Vermont at the time. She took my daughter and flew out to San Francisco for a Dave Matthews Band concert. Got backstage VIP tickets. Stayed at the St. Francis Hotel for a week. Went shopping downtown San Francisco back when it was safe and nice. Bought a really nice white Louis Vuitton purse or just, I mean, I ended up getting a used Browning high power out of that deal.
Oh, man.
So to this day,
that ain't a Rolex.
no Rolex. 20 years later, still no Rolex. So to make matters worse, my buddies knew that I wanted that Rolex. So we all went out to dinner shortly after I got back, and we went to a Brazilian steak place. And we're sitting there, we're just, eating like Romans on a holiday. And one of them hands me a box and says Rolex. I open it up, and there's this beautiful Folex in there. And at first I'm like, what? Oh, you guys, no way. What? And then I see the sweep hand, and I'm like, you guys are dicks. And, that's your friends, right? Your friends. If they can't screw with you, who can? So yeah, Dan's been giving me a hard time about that ever since. So
yeah.
I
mean, I hope Dave Matthews is good.
She told me it was. I mean, that's what I said. I hope it was a good concert.
The funny thing is, if you carefully examine the premise of that story, you said in Afghanistan and ex-wife. No matter how you slice that, it's going to be a story about combat zones.
Yeah, or I guess from a certain perspective, 2 combat zones.
Yeah, yeah.
We made it 20 years. I got to give her credit. She suffered for a long time. So
that's fair.
20 years is a long time.
20 years is a long time objectively. 20 years living under the same roof with me. Yeah, that's worse.
A long time.
That's worse.
I don't think my wife's gonna make it 20 years. She is gonna leave me like tomorrow. There's just no way.
Don't do what I did. All right, don't let him sober up.
No.
There you go.
Can't do it.
I'm just gonna get a random text message from Soph. It's gonna be TJ. I need you and Charlie with an alibi. If anyone asks, I was with you from midnight to noon yesterday, and bring a shovel.
Perhaps a bag of lye.
A lot of lye and a big shovel. It's Kent. God. No, she's the best. She's
just gonna have Grizzlies. No, Grizzly's gonna help.
Yeah. Grizzly will help. Speaking of shovels, the next thing that needs buried, TJ, is your fucking internet connection. I can't.
So the funny thing is, and this is for the folks in the chat, every now and then the camera feed and the audio will fade out on us because it is buffering to upload it to YouTube. I'm actually watching the stream on my phone, and it is not causing any issues that are perceptible, at least from what I can tell, to our audience. However, I'm sure that if we do start to suffer from production quality issues, Dan Brady will not let us live it down.
So only I'm having a stroke. Got it. Hey, speaking of Soph murdering me, Sophie just got a stripe on that jiu-jitsu white belt of hers.
Now she's choking it.
No, at least she'll have choked you out ostensibly before she kills you. So that's working out in your favor, buddy.
Yeah, she's going to gi class. I'm going to no gi class. I just like
a house divided.
A house divided. I like to wrestle guys in my underwear. It's kind of fun. I don't know if that says anything about me or not. Oh, see, Dan Brady says, nope, you suck. Sorry, TJ. Dan Brady says you suck.
You have to consider the source, though. You have to consider the source. He could say that because my internet actually does suck, or he's just doing this to give me a ration of shit. It is both bad and fine internet. I'm suffering the same amount of guilt. It is Schrodinger's Dan Brady.
Schrodinger's Dan Brady.
He is both telling the truth and lying at the same time.
I don't know, man. We'll see. So, TC, where should we start? Let's start with the book, shall we? Talk me through.
Brother, I'm just living in it.
Talk me through without the specific, the numbers and math we were talking about offline. I was kind of like, y'all. I was trying to get a sense of like what successful book publishing looks like and what being an author means from a how many copies are you selling and all that kind of standpoint. But it's also just an interesting process to me. Because it seems very much like old media, like very, very, very old media. not in a making fun way, but it's a thing that's been happening since, the founding of this nation and before. People have been publishing books. There's a guy with a paper and a press, and then another guy and a pen and the whole thing. So, like, TC, when did you first get the notion that you were going to try to be a published author, and why? Where did that come from?
I always liked writing. I mean, even back in high school when it was assigned writing, right? I enjoyed doing that. Didn't always enjoy the topics and the assignments, but, I liked the process. I took some creative writing classes as electives, enjoyed those, almost majored in English in college. I did get a minor in English in college. And my eldest daughter did get a degree in English. So I guess, skips a generation, passed on that same gene, whatever it is. So I've always had kind of the bug, and I had enough people tell me you should write. One person tells you, you're like, oh, they're just blowing smoke, right? But enough people tell you start to think, well, maybe I can do it. And after a couple years of competitive shooting, I was shooting on Masad Ayoub's home range up in New Hampshire. So I was running into him all the time. And I asked him one time, I said, hey, Mas, how do I get into, writing for gun magazines? Because gun magazines were still a thing. And he said in his sonorous voice, well, I'll give you some editors' names and you can get in touch with them. All right. And he did. He was as good as his word. He gave me 3 editors' names. I reached out, cold called all 3 with emails, and one reached back. And that was from Harris Publication. And I wrote an article on suspect packages and why you shouldn't go pick up a suspect package if you think it's an explosive. Monkeying with it probably is not a good idea. And I got paid. So I was like, look at that. Money. So I started writing more. Then I got into grad school. And again, I didn't want to raid the family budget for money to pay for grad school. So I just wrote more articles, got paid more, took that money and paid my tuition with it. And that's where I kind of really cut my teeth. I wrote a whole bunch of articles. It was typically costing me 4 articles would pay for 1 class. So I started banging that down. And then I went on to work on my doctorate. And I had to write, a master's thesis for my master's. Then I had to write a doctoral dissertation for my doctorate. And, I'd always thought, oh God, that's such a heavy lift, but it worked out pretty well and it wasn't debilitating. The hardest part about my dissertation was writing about personal issues. And then from there, after I'd graduated, I said, well, you know what? I've done this 100+ page dissertation. A lot of the research is done. It's a solid academic piece on a topic that's important to me. It was on improving the way we teach law enforcement to administer deadly force. So I took that and, rubbed some Hoppy's number 9 on it and massaged it a little bit and edited it and turned that into my first book called Reasonable, Justified, and Necessary. And then it just kind of gone from there. I'd always wanted to do a memoir about my time in the Bureau, and probably a year or 2 into the Bureau, I decided on calling it Painting Over Rust. And so this past March, I published that book. And that's exactly what it's called, Painting Over Rust. And then I rewrote the first book after it'd been out about a decade and released that here 2 weeks ago. And that's just, I find a lot of fulfillment in doing it. Getting paid is great, but Stephen King, I'm not. I don't think I'll be knocking him off any bestseller charts anytime soon. I just simply don't have the name recognition that a lot of these folks have now, that they can simply have a book ghost written and put their name at the bottom of it and it'll sell 1 million copies. I'm not that person, but I do enjoy writing the stuff. One of the big motivators for writing the memoirs is my kids. As we discussed earlier, I've got 2 little ones here now. I mean, one's 8, one's 5. I'm probably not going to be around to see the youngest one's 50th birthday. Maybe not even the elder of the two's 50th birthday. So I'd like them to have some kind of record of sort of dad's perspective on things. So that was a motivator. And, I'm enough of a student of history to realize that it's important. It's an important part of the historical narrative to have first person experiences recorded for historical perspective 100, 150, 200 years from now or further down the road. And I flatter myself into saying, well, I've got a voice in that conversation. I'm going to write it up and, throw that message in the bottle in the ocean and see what happens. Hope that something nice happens. So in that regard, I'm now working on the next book, which will be Empathy for the Devil, an interrogator in Guantanamo Bay, or probably an interrogator in Gitmo. And that'll be about my time as an interrogator down in Guantanamo, early in the GWAT. So 35,000 words into that right now. And hopefully next summer that'll come out. So it was a slow process to answer your question, Kent.
What a title.
Like that one?
Wow. Holy smokes. So there we go. I'll stick to my original line of questioning, but I was 2 minutes ago old when I learned that you were at Guantanamo as an interrogator. So that's a thing I want to ask about for sure.
All right.
To the degree that like it's something you want to talk about or something that you want, like no spoilers for the book or whatever like that. But I'll just get you to I'm going to put some bait. I'm going to chum a little bit here. Standing order. Please send all the books. Just like y'all playing the home game. I ordered up nicely. By ordered up, I meant, yo, TC, please does send books. And TC was like, does send books. Send some money. I was like, we'll send all money. He said, great. And we did we came to an accord, as he said, and now TJ and I have copies of these books with nice little inscriptions in them. Mine says very nice things.
On the way.
Yeah. I haven't sent them to TJ yet, but they're at my house. So
it's a start, brother. That's a start.
But I was thumbing through them a little bit in preparation for this, and your very nice inscription. You refer to me as a colleague. I would just like to point out that hey, Mom, somebody with a doctorate referred to me as a colleague. So fucking yes.
Show it to Soph. Maybe it'll help you out.
Yeah.
I'm a tonight, honey.
He's good.
I'm a colleague.
That's going on his resume.
You goddamn right it is.
I'm a college to a doctor.
Make sure you pay special attention to the chapter titled Lagavulin. Dan Brady's going to sit out here and bomb me on the chat. We'll just have to remind the viewers and those playing in the home game that the Lagavulin chapter is all about Daniel. So please direct your browser to. You want to know how we met? That's in there.
Yeah.
You want to hear about Dan Brady taking a snowblower on the roof of his house? It's in there. You want to hear about Dan hiring Dowser because his well ran dry? That's in there.
Wait. He hired
to get these books to me ASAP. No, I want the books. Get them now. I'm going to write the chapters.
Brady hired one of them people with the two twigs that come closer
together?
Yes,
he did. I don't have a Rolex, Dan, and I don't have a flamethrower, but I've never hired a dowser to magic me up some freaking water.
Dude, they had when I was in the resort at Killington, they had a convention for those people. And they were like, here I am wearing Carhartts and a radio bib with a Killington t-shirt. And they're walking by me with their sticks. And I'm like, what the fuck y'all doing? They're like, we're looking for water. And I just pointed at the snowmaking pond. And they all just were like, they're all looking at me. I'm like, shouldn't your sticks be walking you over to the pond? Like, are those not water sticks? I don't understand.
The giant puddle?
Yeah. They did not leave a nice review.
Anyway. Well, the best part about that was, not to get too far ahead of things here, but as Dan will tell you, the dowser said, dig here. Dan hired a well digger to dig here. And what did that cost you for a dry hole several thousand feet deep, Dan? $8,000, $10,000, and nearly a lawsuit?
Ooh. I'd like to point out that a Rolex Submariner today costs $9,100.
No, there you go.
So
cheaper than a dowser.
Cheaper than a dowser, as it turns out.
17 grand, he says. Okay, well, that makes sense. And then I think the way he fixed it was he hired a hydro engineer who said, yeah, dig here. And I don't know, what they go down 12 inches and hit, a 50 gallon a minute well. So
Good God.
like I said earlier, wisdom. It's
I guess engineers aren't
completely after you need it.
I guess engineers aren't completely useless.
No, they're not.
Oh my goodness, that's funny. So, time in the Bureau. Give us the decades that you're in the Bureau.
I got in on the Marine Corps birthday, 1997.
Okay.
And I retired on the last day of 2017.
So, 97. So presidencies: Clinton, G-Dub, Obama, and Trump.
Yes.
Okay. Ever interface with the president in your role at the FBI?
At the FBI, no. In the Army, yes, but not at the FBI.
Okay.
Directors interfaced with every director that served while I was an agent in some way, shape, or form.
And your job title there was special agent. You started and ended as a special agent, correct?
Yes. It's funny because those of us of a certain age will recall Die Hard, right? You've got the two FBI guys show up. One says, "Hi, I'm Agent Johnson. This is Special Agent Johnson." No relation. There's those two titles are interchangeable. The official title is Special Agent, and there's no one rank that's agent and one rank that's special agent. That kind of screwed me up when I first got in the Bureau because I was expecting, we've got agents and special agents. No, we don't. We have agents and supervisory special agents. And I was a supervisory special agent for about 5 years.
Okay.
I was a supervisory special agent when I was instructor at Quantico. And then I was also a supervisory special agent when I was up at the Office of Congressional Affairs up on Capitol Hill. I was looking for a job somewhere in the Bureau as a follow-up, which would have been what's called a squad supervisor. So I was going to go back out to the field as a supervisory special agent, but I was going to run an investigative squad somewhere. That was the plan. I was applying all over the place. But by then I had remarried to another agent. Somehow I convinced her to lower her standards enough to agree to marry me. And then she was diagnosed with cancer. So we had to go deal with that. And, she wanted to be in North Carolina to do that. And the only way I could get to North Carolina was to resign out of the supervisory ranks. And to me, that wasn't a question or a choice. I was like, we're out of here. We're gone, And at that point in my career, doing that was the end of my promotional abilities. It was just too late in the game for me to recover from that and then get back into the supervisory ranks. So that's why I finished up as a special agent. And that was fine. That's not even remotely a regret. I didn't see that as an optional decision. That's
every man will find a time in his life when he'll do shit like that for his family.
I hope that doesn't. I don't wish that on other people, but yeah, that is going to happen sometimes. So.
Yeah, I guess better said. My point is, the character of the right kind of guy is the guy that does that shit.
Well, I like to tell myself that.
Yeah. Married to another agent.
Yeah.
So I mean, this has you could write fucking James Bond novels about. I mean, you guys sleeping with guns under your pillows and you pull that one book behind you and the wall flops open and there's fucking machine guns and shit. The whole thing.
What is that that company that makes the cabinets that will go over a closet and they open them up? It's one of the hidden
Tactical Walls.
Yeah, it's like Tactical Walls, but it's not them. It's like Jersey beds or something like that. I don't know, but we have a closet in the house, and she's like, "Oh, you know what? We need to put on this. We need to put one of those walls with the book covers." I was like, "You are awesome." I told her I wanted to put in a new island in our kitchen and double the size and put in another set of shelves and everything, but put them back to back with the shelves we already have, but leave about a 6-inch gap, and then on each side put in shelves where they're magnetic. You push on it, it pops loose. It's about knee up to about waist high. On one side, I said, we'll put a spice rack. It'll be very nice. And so on the other side, we'll put 2 racks for shotguns.
Yeah.
And she's like, oh, that's awesome. We got to do that. That'd be great. And I'm like, so yeah, I married far better than I had any chance or any hope of marrying. So
Preach, my brother, preach. You know.
Yeah. She had options and decided to champion mediocrity. Thank God.
Mm-hmm. So we were talking before about the Rolex and your substandard housing pay in Afghanistan. I want to know if you got substandard housing pay in Vermont or how the fuck that worked out. Because
oh no,
haven't done been there.
I lived in South Burlington. You can't hide money. I wasn't up on Spear Street, but I could see it.
You can't hide money. Yeah, right next to let's see, South Burlington. Right next to the airport and the whale coming out of 89.
I used to run past the whale all the time. I'd work out at Planet Fitness, then go out and run past the whale.
Mm-hmm.
Back when running was a thing I did. Yeah, so I lived there for a long time, 10 years.
Without giving away like sources and methods or super secret trade craft or anything cool, what the fuck was the FBI doing in Vermont besides like catching sugar smugglers and you know?
Good question. I will tell you one of the biggest cases in the office when probably my first year there, another agent caught it, but it was a adulterated maple sugar fraud, and it ran to the tune of millions of dollars. It was one of the bigger frauds that happened while I was there. It was kind of crazy. But what do we do? Well, let's do it this way. First week I was there, we had the bombing that I talk about in my book. It was a fatal bombing down south of one of the small little burgs. Bad guy in the Midwest got crossed by a teenage kid on a CB radio deal. And his response, he got ripped off. Basically, the kid told him, I'm going to sell you a widget, and he didn't sell him the widget. So the guy got pissed and sent him a package bomb. Kid opened it up on his lap, killed him, blew several fingers off his mom, took her kneecap. I mean, it was pretty bad. And that was the first week I was there. The first night
in Vermont, that child died in Vermont.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, the pipe bomb went off in his lap. There's no coming back from that. Yeah, but I write all about it in the book. So go forth, read the book now that you have it.
I shall.
My first night, I talk about that. My first night as an agent, we went out and chased down the guy who was bringing in 2 keys of coke into Vermont on the Greyhound. And it's hysterical because I had buddies that went to Miami. They were classmates of mine. And they're not rolling out of bed for less than 25 keys. But you bring 2 keys of coke into Vermont and everybody gets well, right? I mean, that is huge. That is ginormous amounts for Vermont. And that was the nice thing about working up there is when we did do things and we did take people off, it had a real impact. You know, you take off a drug dealer in Miami, who cares? There's 1,000 more just like him right behind it. You know, a fraudster in New York, yeah, they need to be grabbed. They need to be punished. But does it make above the fold front page news? Probably not. But the cases we worked up there were fairly deep water cases that a lot of times other agencies just weren't going to work. So we were surprisingly busy. I mean, there was only 10 of us in the state plus a boss the whole time I was there. And we worked. I got to be honest, we worked. I mean, we didn't, we would work a fraud case that might be $50,000. That's probably not going to get worked by the FBI in New York City. Just too small. There's too many $5 million frauds down there. So they'll let the state or the county work on $50,000 frauds. But we'll work them in Vermont. So at least we used to. I don't know what we're doing now.
That's interesting. I can only imagine how much shit ended up at the train station behind the Walmart in Rutland. That's all I know.
Well, what years were you there?
I was in Vermont from 2016 to 2018.
Okay.
No, 2006 to 2018. The fuck am I doing? Were
you there when the woman got carjacked down in Rutland at the Walmart? These 2 idiots knifed his mom and her boyfriend. For those who were not in Vermont at the time, you had 2 knuckleheads. By the way, that's a professional term.
Industry
law
term.
enforcement, knucklehead, for law-breaking villain. Anyhow, these two knuckleheads are sitting around playing cards with mom and her boyfriend, maybe husband, I don't recall. Everyone's drinking, playing cards. The two knuckleheads get pissed off at mom and the boyfriend, so they go in the kitchen, grab a steak knife or a pair of steak knives, kill mom and the boyfriend, stab them to death. They have enough wherewithal at that point to say, yeah, we probably got to get out of town. Oh, you got a car? No, I ain't got a car. Well, we'll just go down to the Walmart. And for those of you who've never been to Rutland, you probably don't realize it, but the Walmart in Rutland is really city center. I mean, that is the place to go to do much of anything on a Friday night in Rutland. At least it was, 15 years ago. So these two idiots go down there and they carjack some random woman coming out of Walmart and throw her in the car, and off they go. They get over into New York and decide they don't need her anymore, and they're just going to throw her out of the car. So they stop out in the woods, and you've been out there driving between Rutland and New York. I mean, there's just nothing out there, and they let her loose in the woods. And then they get to talking, like, hey, wait a minute, she heard where we're going. She knows too much. We can't let her get away. And so they take off after her. And I'm to this day a little fuzzy on whether her feet were tied or she was shoeless or whatever. For whatever reason, they were able to have this conversation, jump out of the car, chase her through the woods, which had to have been terrifying for her. They catch up to her and they beat her to death out in the woods. And then they jump back in the car, drive out, get caught in Arkansas. One of them commits suicide in jail. Other one comes back to Vermont, and over the course of, 5 or 10 years, he was eventually convicted on a federal death penalty ride, and is sent off to the big house. So we had that in Rutland, I mean, and is that going to make the news everywhere in the country? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. But it was a horrible, horrible crime in Vermont. And, we brought down the wrath of God on that guy, those two guys. So
yeah,
the crimes were there. I mean, I eventually put a guy on the top 10 list, and the FBI's 10 most wanted list. He's the only one in the history of the state of Vermont to ever make the list. Write about him in the book too. You can read all about that case.
Thank God it wasn't me.
He was a preferential sex offender, and I worked a lot of those guys over the course of my decade there.
Yeah. A lot of backwoods, weird, incestual / a lot of, how do I put this? A lot of white poverty crime in Vermont. A lot of domestic violence, a lot of alcoholism, whole lot of like bathtub illicit drug kind of use. Not super sexy and flashy, and not very it's almost like the Florida of New England in some ways, some parts of it anyway.
Yeah, I wasn't really prepared for the hillbilly, the typical hillbilly person that I ran into often up in the northeast corner of the state of Vermont, which of course Vermonters refer to, as as the Northeast Kingdom.
Yeah.
But it's every bit of out in the wilderness of the Appalachians, the same sort of mindset, the same sort of approach to life, same sort of poverty, the same sort of criminality exists up there. Only it's colder. It's really the only thing. And some things, local and state police departments just are not prepared to deal with. And I get that, right? Because you don't want me as an FBI agent trying to pull over a car for speeding, because I don't know what the hell I'm doing.
Right.
You don't want me working a domestic violence case because I've not been trained in that. I did a ride along one time with a friend of mine who was a police officer at the University of Vermont.
Mm-hmm.
And he pulled a car over. And I know one way to pull a car over, and that's a felony car stop, right? So
Sure.
I get out of the car on the passenger side, and I've got my hand on my gun. I'm walking up on these people, and I didn't draw my weapon. I had enough sense not to do that. And the people in the car were freaking out. They're like, holy crap. And my buddy was laughing his ass off. He's like, if I touched my gun like that for no reason, he said, I would be in so much trouble. And I was like, is there another way to walk up on a car? I mean, everybody in there, I can't see their hands. They could all be armed. I mean, this is Vermont. Everybody's got a flipping gun up here. And rightly so. I have no problem with that. But, I'm walking up on a car of criminals here. So just a different mindset, a different approach, and we went after a different, criminal subset.
I just got this image in my head of you being the Raylan Givens of Vermont. And I really, really like that image. I'm not going to lie.
I really wish I could pull off the hat, but I do have a really nice set of Triblies and a couple of snap brims that are really, really sexy. I got to be honest. I wore those a lot when I was working up on Capitol Hill because, you gotta have the image, right? People expect the image, you got to give them the image. So double-breasted suits and trench coats and the whole nine, baby. The whole
fake hand. No, wait, that's the Secret Service. Never mind. The fake hand is the Secret Service. I'm sorry. Wrong federal trench coat thing. So I'm kind of struck by like what sort of normalcy that you speak of, because full transparency, I've read the foreword to the books. I just got them in my hands here a couple 2 days ago, but TC and I have now, we've done one podcast together. TC's alumni at GMD. We spent 2 days on the range together. We spent some time on the range together once before that. So I find some interest in the way that folks speak about their abnormal circumstances as though they're totally normal. You talk to cops, talk to soldiers, talk to firefighters, talk to IT specialists who beep boop and take down the Russians for a living, whatever people do, and people just talk about their shit like they're taking out the trash.
Mm-hmm.
Like, is that something, TC, that you've come to in retirement and later in life, or did this career seem normal to you the whole time?
That's a really deep question, Ken. I would say that from my experience, at least my perspective, intellectually, I understood, sort of the oddity of it all, but it never really got my head around it emotionally until later. I'm still kind of figuring some of it out. I will look at it this way. Ranger school in the Army. When I went through that, you knew it was going to suck. And so you went through it. And the whole time I was there, I was like, this doesn't suck as bad as I thought it was going to. I thought it was going to be worse. I think it'll probably be worse tomorrow. What's that line from, oh God, the dread pirate Roberts. You did well today, Kent. Sleep well. I'll probably kill you tomorrow. Right. So the same idea. Tomorrow's going to suck. That's just the way it is. And then when I got out and a year or two went by, I'd think back on different, anecdotes and things that had happened. I was like, wow, that was really crappy. Good Lord. Oh my God. I remember that. It didn't seem so bad at the time, but man, looking back, that's insane. Why would I do that? And then I got into diffusing bombs for the Army. And again, you're insanely well trained. I mean, we had a higher failure rate in my EOD school class than we did in my Ranger school class. I mean, people got
really?
Oh yeah, far more.
Yeah, EOD's got a higher turnover rate than the SEALs do.
Yeah, it's nuts. It was because it's academic. It's not a gut check, right? Because you can be dumb as a bag of hammers and get through Ranger school. But you've really, the EOD. Well, I'll put it this way: some of the tests when I went through, most of the tests, 82 and below was a failing grade out of 100. 82. Okay, it's a B anywhere else. It was failing. And some of the tests that you took, one mistake was worth 19 points.
Okay.
So you could literally, I saw it happen to people. They could walk up on a device, look at it, take one step, and they've failed the test by taking that step. And then they still have to spend the next 3 hours doing the test, but they've already failed it. And
are they cognizant of their failure in that moment? Do they know they failed?
Some do, some don't. Some of them, you see them take a step and they go, oh, and they knew. They just knew. But at that point, you're like, okay, I'm going to have to retest. I better just get the practice in. I better do the rest of this test, get the score, and find out how it's going to do. And if you think about it, it's brutal. And I think we had a 40%, 38% pass rate in my class. But you think about it, the device doesn't, if you're working on an actual explosive, it doesn't care what your rank is. It doesn't care that you wanted to do the right thing. If you screw up, it's going to go. and it's taking you with it. It's going to turn you into a pink mist and a smoking pair of boots, right? So better to fail out in the school and never become an EOD tech than to get through it by hook or by crook and then go out there and blow yourself up.
Yep.
So yeah, it was brutal, but I didn't really think about how tough that was or how difficult and dangerous some of the things I did as an EOD tech were until after it was over. And then I look back and went, oh my God. So the same thing is true, I would say, to answer your question. It's a long way around the tree, I admit, but to answer your question about the stuff I did in the Bureau, especially crimes against kids, that was something I never wanted to work. And that was what my boss gave me to work. And I worked it for about 10 years. And, some of the things you see is just horrible. And you can talk to anybody, firemen, cops, ambulance guys, and they'll tell you something very similar, that you may see 1,000 incidents in your career and 5 or 6 of them will stick with you and they'll never get out of your head. And you're just the way it is. I mean, I vividly remember the first time I ran into child pornography. I can't tell you what I saw in the hundreds of cases I worked after that, and all of them. I can tell you some of them. But that first time I found child pornography on a guy, he was a bank robber, of all things. We were there for a bank robbery, and I found his child porn stash. And that has stuck with me ever since. It's just, I look at it like, if I broke my ankle and I had to walk with a limp, that's just the way it is, right? This is just a emotional ankle break, if you will. So I didn't really think of it at the time a lot. I don't think I could have continued to do the work, frankly, if I had overthought it. But yeah, looking back on it now, and it's funny because even now I look back on some of the things and it's like touching a hot stove. It's like, no, I'm going to go think about something pleasant. I don't really want to open that door. I've got it compartmentalized and stuck away in its little corner in its box, and that's a good place for it to stay. So I hope
I'll be real. That's a constant fear that I live in, doing incident response investigations and stuff. You have to be prepared for that to come across, right? You could get brought in to just look at a basic business email compromise, right? Some CEO or CFO or whatever clicked a link in an email that they shouldn't have, and you're investigating. You obviously have to take a full image of that system. As you dig into that thing, you very well could come across some really dark shit.
Yeah.
And you
and
have
sometimes
you
it's not
have
an
to know
accident.
yeah.
I mean, you just never know what's going on in people's lives, right? They could be the most seemingly normal, well-adjusted person in the world, and then you get into their computer and you're like, holy crap.
I can't fathom, and I don't want an example, and I really, I guess, don't want to fathom it, but that's a switch that I really just can't understand how it gets flipped. Like where that comes from in a person's psyche really doesn't. That just doesn't compute. I don't get that.
No, and especially if you are a normal, well-adjusted, functioning adult and you have children, you look at your kids and you go, how could anybody contemplate that? And there's plenty of studies on it, and they talk to these guys, they interview them at length, and a lot of them, they were traumatized, they were victimized as kids, and they in turn grow and victimize others as sort of a way of getting their head around what happened to them. Some people are just born broken, right?
Yeah.
Some people spend all their money on guns, or they spend all their money on Ghostbusters paraphernalia. Some people fixate on kids, right? I mean, it's just the way it kind of works, and it's horrible and it's terrible, but it's out there. And I'm with you. I don't really understand how you get to that point. But that doesn't, understanding how somebody got to that point doesn't preclude you from going after them and catching them from having gotten to that point.
Yeah, that's fair enough, right? Like the how matters, or the why matters less in the moment, right? Like the facts are the facts, and you just take them where they go. But I don't know. That's always been one of those sticking points. That and people who needlessly expose their children to violence and criminal behavior in general at all, right? Kids of drug dealers, kids of sex workers.
Yeah.
That whole freaking, I don't know. That seems like it's been a a very small corner of our society for a long time that isn't as small as we would like to say it is.
Well, the internet has certainly given them the ability to validate one another's behavior.
Sure.
To your earlier point, I don't think there's anybody that's been in law enforcement, ambulance crew for any length of time that hasn't been in a house and looked at what's going on in that home and then seen a kid in the corner and thought, that kid's doomed. That kid started out behind the 8 ball and they're just not going to get out because of the idiots that they're surrounded by. You know, and it's tragic. It's horrible to see some 4-year-old, 3-year-old infant and knowing that they're just doomed, you know, that their odds of getting out from under this are almost zero. And there's not a thing you can do about it. And it's heartbreaking. It really is. And this is why I tell people that law enforcement's not for everybody.
Yeah, I'm it's interesting, right? My brother has made a career out of law enforcement, done, you know, stuff with special victims and detective work and all that kind of stuff. And I see him and I as very similar humans, like in terms of our temperament and our attitudes and our gusto and our, like, who we are and our silly humor and all that stuff. But I'm going to tell you something. That dude got all the patience. My man got all the patience. I didn't get that patience. I just did not get that. And I have very little patience for the idea that somebody would harm children like that, among other things. But that's really a sticking point for me.
Yeah, so, it was the hard part for me was always dealing with the victims. I happily avoided that as much as I possibly could, and I passed it off to people who specialized in dealing with, you know, child victims, you know, social workers, child welfare workers, and they would do the victim interviews. I could do the bad guy interviews, and that takes a certain kind of approach because you're in my case at least a lot of times, you know, tamping down the desire to just put two in their dome because of the way they're talking. I mean, when a guy looks at you and says, "Oh, that 30-year-old boy, you just don't know, precocious," huh? And you got to sit there and instead of, you know, giving into your baser instincts, you've got to get them to continue to talk about and make statements against their own interest because you're playing the long game, right? I want to hear what you have to say, and if I have to pretend to empathize with you, and I have to sit here and validate your sexual attraction to this child or this infant in order to keep you talking, then that's what I'm going to do because I know that at the end of this is a deep, dark federal hole that I'm going to shove you into. But between here and there, I've got to sit here and go, oh yeah, well, you know, it's rare you find one like that, but boy, when you do,
oh my God,
yeah,
I had not even like, this is what happens when I ask questions that are deeper than I was prepared for the answer, right? Like, holy fuck.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, that was one of the first questions that I asked my instructor when we went through an interrogation and interview training. Our instructor was at the time an 11-year veteran of Chicago PD, and we one of the first questions we asked him, like, hey, how do you deal with, you know, Chester? And he explained exactly what TC did. He goes, it sucks, but you got to empathize with him. He goes, on the plus side, though, when you do get that confession, when you could swallow that deep down and put your baser instincts aside, you could. Is probably going to stab the shit out of him or make him his bitch.
Yeah, they have a rough go of it when they get inside. But you know, we send a lot of them in the federal system to Butner Correctional Facility, and that's actually in North Carolina. I pass it all the time when I drive up to DC. And I point and I laugh and I think, oh, boy, the number of guys I put in that place, you know, hooray me. But you know, it's true of anybody that you're going to interrogate. You have to be able to empathize, and or at least you have to be able to fake empathy. And I did that pretty well, I think. I mean, well enough to have been an interrogator in Guantanamo Bay. I was an interrogator in Afghanistan. I talked to a lot of really bad people over the years and got a lot of them to say things that they probably didn't want to live with. But, you know, in the case of preferential sex offenders, it was federal prison. In the case of terrorists, you know, they'd make the tell me the right things, and I'd be helping people put warheads on foreheads in combat zones. So, empathy it's a difficult thing to really fake, but, fake it or not, you've got to be empathetic, because bad guys, they don't confess to their worst enemy, right? That's why I say that torture it's an amateur's technique. They confess to their best friend, and you've got to convince them that you're the only friend they've got. Pulling fingernails out will get you only so far, and then you're just going to piss them off, and they're going to lie, and they're going to prevaricate, and they're going to tap dance, and they're going to give you half truths, and it's really more effort than it's worth, in my mind.
So that's funny. You just answered something, since we're segueing into the interrogation thing. I'm not going to bother asking you what percentage of the shit you hear out of Guantanamo was true or whatever, or any of those shenanigans. I guess I'm really more interested in the overall goal of that. Seems to me that it had to be very time sensitive, right? Like if you've got a person in there and you're interrogating them, there's a direct, like your moniker there, warheads on foreheads or whatever. There's a direct impact on the information that you're getting, and it's actionable within a short frame of time, or at least within a reasonably short frame of time. So what's the lead up like? Here you've got this guy out of Abbottabad or wherever you got him out of, and he's in Gitmo, and here comes like pasty white federal Vermont cop fella. How the fuck do you manage to convince that guy you're his buddy?
Well, you actually touched on a couple things.
Sort of.
Yeah, I think I understand where you're going. I mean, a couple of things you touched on is, one, what level are you trying to interrogate him at, right? When you grab a guy, when I got to sit down with a guy from Afghanistan in Guantanamo Bay, they didn't just teleport there, right? There was a process by which they came there, and they passed through many, many hands before I got a hold of them. And they'd already been hit for tactical intelligence, right? Tactical intelligence being the short-term, time-sensitive stuff. Where's the machine gun nest? Where is Abu TJ? We're looking for that knucklehead. Where is he? Waiting 6 months to tell me isn't helpful, right? Because Abu TJ done beat feet down to Pakistan, and then he's now on a beach somewhere by then. So by the time
lots of oceanfront property there,
lots and lots. So by the time I'm sitting down in Guantanamo Bay, I'm looking for strategic intelligence, right? I'm sitting down and talking to a guy about infrastructure. I'm talking to a guy about the financial structure of Al-Qaeda and how they are getting money on a macro scale, moving millions from point A, from Sheikh A to point B to point C. What is their structure like? Are they using hawalas? Are they using traditional bank accounts? Are they using runners? How is that money flowing? How are the guns flowing? How are the people flowing? What does the recruitment process look like? You could probably figure out, just sitting there, put 10 minutes of thought in, you can figure out a lot of the questions that I'm going to be asking. And understanding those infrastructure hot points, supports is critical, right? Because then we can direct our investigative intelligence later on, our investigative efforts later on, to attack those structures. Now, along the way, if you tell me, there's a secret entrance to Bora Bora or Tora Bora, and it's on the backside of this, and it's under this, and it's on the stump that Sergeant Schultz is guarding, well, then okay, that's great. I can put that out. And occasionally they would come down and say, hey, look, we're going to have a mission in Afghanistan. It's going to go over to this one particular section of the country. We've identified 38 guys here in Gitmo that have some affiliation with that section of the country. We need to know everything about that town or that region. So we'd go in and we just hammer those guys and we'd bring them in and, hey, where's the doctor live? What's the street like? Is it dirt? Is it hard pack? Is it paved? Do you have running water? Do you have electricity? Anything we could get, we would get. And then that would get aggregated, processed, and sent on to the warfighters to do with what they could. And they would integrate that into their own battlefield intelligence and move forward. So in that sense, it really represented a new way of warfighting for the United States, right? Because we had never really integrated strategic intelligence gathered by federal law enforcement into the battlefield intelligence picture that the military units were generating themselves. So it gave the warfighters on the ground a much better overall picture, for the generals making the decisions, the brigade commanders making the decisions, the battalion commanders making the decisions. They had a lot more context by which to operate. And in some cases, they had specific intelligence. Oh, I lived on the corner of that street, and I know that the guy next door to me was a complete asshole, and he hated the FBI, or he hated the military, he hated the Americans, or, oh, he loves you guys. I don't know why you would ever have dropped a bomb on his house. Even those things would make their way into our happy little hands, and we'd pass them on.
So this,
go ahead.
This sea change in tactics, integrating federal law enforcement interrogation into warfighting, where did that come from? What was the genesis for that?
9/11. All of a sudden, a war came home, right? And it was a war not by the Imperial Navy of Japan, right? That's not who hit us. It was a bunch of guys in civilian clothes, not part of a recognized military force. So I had sort of a philosophical issue with the concept of a enemy combatant that they came up with at the time. I was like, you know what, just apply the Geneva Convention. If you're fighting a war and you are not dressed in the uniform of a combatant, a recognized combatant, then you're a terrorist and we're going to shoot you. And we've got 150 years of military law and precedent to back that up. Why are we even bothering with these guys? Stack them up against the wall and shoot them. Fortunately, I'm not emperor, so that didn't happen. I'm not the guy that's making those decisions. But yeah, that's what 9/11 happened, and it was a whole new type of war. And so they decided to fight it a whole new type of way. And I didn't agree with everything that we did after that, but I certainly agreed with the idea of breaking down the wall between the CIA and the FBI and stopping some of that internecine warfare and fighting, because the only people who benefit from that are the bad guys. So let's get that out of the way. And they did a pretty good job of that. I mean, there are CIA agents in just about every FBI office in the country now, the main field offices at least. So we work hand in glove with those guys really, really well now after 20 years.
I could actually speak to this part a little bit, Kent, too. The realization and the value proposition brought on by bringing in, call it quote unquote, civilian law enforcement to help support the interrogation and intelligence collection features and mission objectives of the United States government as a whole when fighting the global war on terror was largely stemmed from the fact that organizations operate a lot more closely with a criminal syndicate. So think mafia style organizational structure, not so much the line of black chart of the Red Russian Army, right? We're not looking at a tank battalion of T-72s. We're looking at financiers, facilitators, suppliers, logisticians. Honestly, I was a end user of a lot of the intel that TC and his team and his cohorts produced. And some of the best intelligence I ever got came out of the interrogations at Guantanamo Bay from the FBI interrogators and the DEA. Because they're looking at it differently.
Yeah, new type of war, new way to
look at it differently.
Yeah. And you asked Kent earlier on, I didn't get a chance to answer that yet, but you asked, how do you get to that guy? How do you get through to that guy? And how do you empathize with that? How do you get that guy to talk? And that's a really good question, because that was the challenge, right? And I will talk about it in the book that I'm doing now. There's a time when I sat down with a guy and he basically put his hands behind his head like you just did, Kent, and leaned back, and his attitude was, what are you going to do to me? He says, the Saudis had me in jail for about 5 years. He said, they used to pull my fingernails out, my toenails out. They beat the crap out of me. They would starve me. They would, not give me water. He said, what are you going to do to me? You're not going to give me pate, and it's a valid question, right? How do you get to that guy? And I relayed this to a couple of people recently. And I said, you're right. This is my approach to that question. I said, you're absolutely right. So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to come in here and talk to you today, and you're either going to talk to me or you're not. You're going to answer my questions truthfully or you're not. And if you don't answer my questions or you lie to me, then I'm not coming back for a week. And then in a week, I'll come back and we'll do this again. And if you lie to me or don't talk to me then, I'm not coming back for a month. And then if same thing happens, I'm not coming back for 6 months. I'm not coming back for a year. And he said, eventually I'm going home. I'm going to retire. I'm going to grow old. I'm going to, go fishing with my 5 sons. Because I always told them I had 5 sons. And while I'm doing that, you're going to go back and sit in that little cage that we've got you in down there. That's, 8 feet long by 4 feet wide by 7 feet tall. And you're going to sit there and you're going to grow old. And meanwhile, back in the old country, some other guy is sleeping with your wife. Some other guy is raising your kids. You're being forgotten. You're just sitting here rotting. And someday you're going to need chemotherapy, or you're going to need kidney dialysis, or you're going to need heart surgery. And the U.S. federal government is going to give those things to you free of charge, just to extend your miserable fucking existence for another day or another week or another month. That's how angry the U.S. government is at you. So talk to me, and maybe you get home, or don't talk to me and you sit here and rot. Makes no never mind to me. And you'd be surprised, Kent, at how effective that conversation is, especially to people, I think you can probably relate, and you, TJ, people who actually love their kids, love their wife, right? And when you put it in those terms, that I'm never going to see those people. Is this fight in which clearly the bosses of this fight don't care about me? Is it so important to me that I'm willing to give all of that up? Shockingly few decided they would give all that up to stay in that.
They crack pretty quickly when you start pulling those cards on them. They really will, because it's all about, you got to in a country of dirt farmers. What else do they have? It's not. There's only a handful of them that actually have real money, and trust me, ain't none of those guys ending up in a interrogation cell anytime soon. Nope. So these guys that TC and his cohorts would talk to, all they have is family. All they have is their legacy, their wife, their children. That, by the way, tip hat to you for making the claim that you have 5 sons, because that in and of itself will garner a lot of respect in that culture. Yeah, a man is measured by how many sons he has, along with
number of wives, number of sons. And I'm not gonna fib. I read and have read an awful lot about that particular culture. I mean, if my camera was not as poor as it is, you could probably see a bunch of the books I have back here. I first read the Quran on my way to the first Gulf War in 1990. So I've spent a lot of time studying that part of the world. I've lived in that part of the world. My Arabic used to be fairly decent. It's crap now. But having that understanding, having that background, I think helped a lot. Understanding that culture helped a lot. And it was funny too, because every time I'd have one of them come in, one of the things you had to do there was use a translator. But if I had a guy come in that spoke Arabic, the first thing I would hit him with is Assalamu alaikum Siddiqui, kefalak. Inta kwais? Ana min TC, ana min Wahadi FBE. And they'd be like, oh shit, this guy speaks Arabic. And then I would switch back to English and use a translator to talk to him. And now the whole time they're thinking, he's using a translator, but how much Arabic does he speak? And again, you're just trying to unhinge them a little bit, get them off balance a little bit. I'd throw Pashtun at the Pashtun speakers. I would throw, whatever language I could get away with. And surprisingly, here's something that didn't make the news a lot. They weren't all Arabs that we had locked up there. They weren't all Afghans that we had locked up there. I mean, we had Englishmen,
Chechens, Uzbeks,
Uyghurs, lots of Uyghurs. I'd never even heard of a Uyghur until I got down there. We had a lot of Uyghurs down there. We had Australians. We had, so it was truly a global jihad for these guys. And, you ended up running into all kinds of them, all kinds. So read all about it in my next book.
So let's promo these books a little bit. So we got the Teaching Cops to Shoot book.
We do.
We got the FBI book, and now we got the Gitmo book. So there we go. No safe alternative.
No safe alternative. You know, it's funny because I don't know. Can you make out the subtitle there?
Yeah, improving how we teach cops to kill.
Yeah. I did that deliberately. I went with a provocative subtitle deliberately. I've gotten a little bit of pushback from it. Funnily enough, I've also gotten some vocal support about that. But I went with that provocative subtitle to kind of grab people's attention, right? Because we'll talk all day long about implementing deadly force. But what are we really talking about at that point? Or what are we teaching cops to do when we put them on a range and we teach them to shoot? Right? We're teaching them to implement deadly force in a legally appropriate time, place, and fashion. But what does that really mean? You know, boiling it down to its essence, that we're teaching cops how to utilize a level of force that can reasonably be expected to kill or seriously bodily injure another person. And as soon as you start saying we're teaching cops to kill, it's amazing to me the number of people that go, whoa, hey, wait a minute. I've had FBI people go, really, kill? Well, yeah. What the hell do you think we're doing out here? Playing freaking
Ixnay on the ILK.
And I get it. And I go, you know, I explain it away in the book. I'm like, look, it's a marketing ploy, but what are we talking about here? We're talking about the use of deadly force, and deadly force is defined in most jurisdictions as that level of force which can reasonably be expected to result in death or serious bodily injury. So let's talk about it. You know, I don't think you can talk about it. I don't think you can make things better if you can't define the problem, can't define your terms, right? So hence the gripping subtitle.
So interesting, kind of your time. Did your time in the academy, in the FBI academy, inform this? Did your time, like, what really informed your perspective on what I'm going to refer to as civilian law enforcement?
Okay.
Like drawing a line between the feds and you know, Officer Brady, for example. You know, the guy in Burlington doing the Burlington thing, fighting the emus and dealing with the drunk fat women and, you know, whatever other
and
awesome.
Let's not forget the super soaker. Let's not forget that. Make sure you ask Dan about the arrest of the century that he bagged in his first year or two. The villainous felon running about shooting people with a super soaker. That was a police report Dan should never have let me see.
This next trip to North Carolina is going to be so much fun.
It is.
Right.
You're going to be well prepared when you read that book.
All right.
Because Dan will scream and yell about, that's not true. That's not how it happened. The reality is you can't trust eyewitness testimony, especially when it's, you know, Dan Brady. But you know, what got me started on that path, Kent, was Dave Grossman's book on killing. Okay. And I read that, 25 years ago, whenever it was. And I'm fortunate. I've got a signed copy of it on my bookshelf behind me, as well as his follow-up, which was, what's his follow-up book? On combat. I've got a signed copy of that too. So I'm really fortunate that, you know, Dave kind of really rolled out the red carpet for me, because I read that book on killing. And if you haven't read it, I highly recommend it, especially for those in this particular line of work. But he talks about, you know, what we really know happens to soldiers and, you know, combat troops. Okay, for the Marines out there, calm down. You know, what happens to them when they go to war, and how much psychological impact it has on people, and what are the realities of combat. And it's a groundbreaking book. But my question at the time was, okay, Dave, we know these things. Why are we not using these things to inform our approach to training? Right?
Can I ask you a question about Grossman?
I wish you would.
Okay. Where's all the hate come from with this? Because there seems to be, and here's the deal, right? I've read it. I'm also not in the profession. Ain't never been no soldier. Ain't never been no cop. So this is all very much as part of pursuit of a firearms trainer, from my perspective. There's a lot of. It seems very fashionable in law enforcement training circles to be pretty anti-Grossman these days. Are you tracking on that? And
Not
can
really.
you explain to me where the hate is? Like, do you know or you don't?
No, I don't know. I mean,
Okay.
look, he brought that book out 20, 25 years ago. It was groundbreaking.
Yeah.
Now it's like a Glock, right? Glocks were groundbreaking when they came out in the 80s. 40 years later, they're commonplace, and everybody's done a knockoff to get their slice of the Glock pie. And it's easy to hate on the Glock, right? Because it's not a Howard, or it's not a lead sling and ginger gun. It's not the new hotness. So can you hate on him? Yeah, I suppose you can. And let's face it, he's not the same guy today as he was 25 years ago. None of us are. Things change. So I don't know any specific reason why people would hate on him, but I know how people are, and people are, in large groups are venal, cowardly, dangerous herd animals. So God knows what they're upset about. But upset about it or not, take from it what you can use, right? Go at it like Bruce Lee says, right? Take what you can use, throw away the rest. And
there's a subset of listener to this show. I'm thinking about individuals. I'm going to do my damnedest not to just say their names. But there are dudes who will hear you say Grossman and they just shut this off.
Okay.
They stopped listening. And I don't get so the tribalism. I love how we talk about not being tribal until it's time to be tribal.
Until it's my tribe.
Right. But it's interesting to me how that has become Grossman and Cirillo. Jim Cirillo, the guy, the New York Stakeout Squad cop.
I knew Jim.
I know you do. I'm not mansplaining to you, Dr. Fuller. I'm mansplaining to the audience who may not, if you've been taking private lessons from GMD for 6 months, you may not know who these people are. I would encourage you to get familiar. Go read Cirillo's New York Stakeout Squad book. But in the modern firearms training culture, it is fashionable today to poo-poo Grossman and to poo-poo Cirillo.
Okay. And
I don't know why.
Well, I will say this about that. I don't agree with 100% of what Colonel Grossman came up with. He relies pretty heavily on some facts and figures that I find academically questionable. I knew Jim Cirillo, didn't know him well, but I ran into him a lot and talked every time I ran into him. Good guy. His book on the New York Stakeout Squad is, I think, a really good read. But I also think that if you tried to employ the tactics today that he employed in the 60s, you would go to federal prison. Okay, there's just no way around it. If I knew that there was a gang of 3 to 5 heavily armed felons knocking over liquor stores in my town, and I took 2 guys on a stakeout and waited for them, and in essence ambushed them when they showed up, the FBI would put me so far underneath the jail they'd have to pump in daylight. But it's a different time, right? It's absolutely. So does that mean that you got to throw the baby out with the bathwater, that you can't pull anything useful and applicable today out of that information? I would say no. Others will disagree, and that's fine. But I utilized, Grossman energized me, and we're talking about 25 years ago now, to say, okay, let's take what we know. And 2 things. One, we need to do more research. We need to do solid academic research. I mean, Colonel Grossman's interviews are great. I think it's a great start, but it's not what I would consider extremely academically rigorous. And I think that there's a wide open field there for somebody that has the time and the youth and the energy to go out and do solid quantitative and, if possible, or qualitative and, if possible, quantitative research in that area. But regardless, I said, we have this information, we have this anecdotal information. Let's use it to inform our approach to training, right? Because law enforcement training, typically it changes every time there's a tragedy, right? After the CHP lost that shootout in Southern California back in the 70s, there were changes to training. Not a lot of changes after that. I would imagine Dallas PD changed a lot of their training paradigms after they lost 5 guys in one shootout here a few years ago. Did that translate to massive changes across the profession? I don't know. Improvements across the profession? I don't know. I tend to think not, but it's possible. But those large paradigm shifts don't happen very often. And the point I was trying to make was, well, let's take the things that we're learning. I mean, my God, there's grill cameras everywhere. There are body cameras everywhere. We have such a massive amount of information now that John Correa's made a career out of it, right? Of just watching that stuff. And why are we all not watching these things and noticing the trends, noticing the patterns, and applying them to our training paradigm? You know, do we really need to spend a ton of time training at 50 yards to win gunfights? I would say it's not wasted, but if you're really teaching gunfighting, that's probably not where I would start. Because law enforcement gunfights rarely happen at that distance, and we never lose at that distance unless it's a rifle fight, right? So why are we not making the appropriate changes? You know, we don't teach gunfighting by and large in law enforcement. In some places they do. I'm not going to say nowhere is it done, but we don't teach gunfighting very often at the academy. And this is the point of my book. I say, look, let's understand that being able to handle a gun administratively, and I know you gentlemen know this because you make your living doing this, is different than fighting with a gun, right? Coming out to a square range and shooting at a known distance target while somebody says, ready, fire, cease fire, holster your weapon, and gives you nothing but commands, and it's a cold range. That's all great. That's awesome. I think there's a place for that. You got to start somewhere. Probably a good place to start. But that's not gunfighting. And that's not teaching people to fight with a gun. And that, sadly, is what happens at the vast majority of law enforcement training. And I liken it to, you know, the idea that just because you can fly a Cessna 172 doesn't mean you can dogfight, right? The ability to fly the plane is a minimum requirement to get into the dogfight, right? Well, the ability to administratively handle a firearm, and you gentlemen understand that phrase, be able to load it, unload it, holster it, carry it around all day, not blow your own tender pink flesh off with it, not shoot people that don't need to be shot. That's the minimum. That's the ante to get into the poker game, right? But just because you can ante up does not mean you are ready to play in the World Series of Poker. And far too often, I think in law enforcement, we teach people to ante up, and that's where we stop. So my book is a call for let's say that was okay for what it was and when it was, but let's improve it. Let's take the next step forward. Let's keep moving this ball forward, because it is too critically important a topic to not move forward, to not say, well, that's good enough, move on. That's what's legally required, move on. You know, you gentlemen make a living in part out of teaching people, what is legally required is not enough. You know, you need to move forward. You need additional training. You need additional practice. And I think that's absolutely true of law enforcement. Hence the book.
Hence this podcast.
Yeah, really. It interests me, and this is a good segue. I want to talk about this. So you spent 5 years in the academy, in the FBI, teaching. Yes,
I did.
Teaching just gun stuff, or teaching, how to defraud the American taxpayer and how to hide the Clintons' emails and whatever other fucking shenanigans y'all taught. Like what was your primary? Talk to me about teaching FBI agents.
Had to slip that in there, huh? Okay, fair enough.
I mean, come on, brother. Yeah.
Hey, look, I tell people all the time, it is a great time to be a retired Fed.
Right.
Great time to be retired.
I've also got a joke about how often you guys ask the ATF to go get coffee. That's coming later.
Fair enough. I
only had two pre-planned attacks in this one. That was it. They're softballs.
Used to get along real well with the ATF guys up in Vermont. There's just too few of us for anybody to be real parochial. They were a good bunch of guys. But I got to be honest, I think I was the gun expert in the ATF up there. I mean, I was the gun guy, right? So anyhow, your question.
Well, to be fair, we've seen what the director of the ATF knows.
There you go. But we got to admit that the director is a political guy and the ATF agents are not. And I always tell agents at the FBI Academy, you got to be nice to the ATF guys and Secret Service guys, because we all have one thing in common. We all applied to the FBI.
See, I knew there was a punchline. I knew you had one somewhere.
Had to be a punchline in there. All right. So restate your question for me, Kent, because I've gotten way far afield.
What all did you teach in the FBI?
Okay.
And specifically, how much of that has dovetailed to you're in a consultative / basically my understanding is that you're teaching assassins how to shoot for Miley Cyrus and them. That's what I understand of the Horus group so far. I think the Horus group taught Miley Cyrus's security how to shoot. That's what I'm going with.
All right, let's go with that.
Right.
One of the things about the Horus group, we don't talk about our clients, and we don't ever use them in our advertising. So whether or not I've ever trained anyone on Miley Cyrus's staff, I will just assume that I have an NDA in place and I won't talk about it.
That's a yes. You came in like a wrecking ball.
So
and you solved all the problems.
Yeah, I assume that's a musical segue that I don't understand.
Right. I'm sorry. You're an adult. I'm sorry. I forgot you're an adult. Anyway, what did you teach at the FBI? Guns, defensive tactics, what?
Yeah, well, I was a defensive tactics instructor also, so I did teach that, but it was not what I taught at the FBI Academy. The whole time I was at the Academy, I taught firearms, and the vast majority of who I taught, I shouldn't say the vast, but probably 70% of the instruction I provided was to new agent trainees, right? Or NATs, as we call them. And these are people fresh off the street. They've come in the FBI and they have to demonstrate, like any police academy, they have to demonstrate a certain level of proficiency in order to pass through the hallowed gates and on to becoming an FBI agent. It was the biggest single block of instruction they received at the academy, which surprises a lot of people.
Yeah, that just surprised me. Shooting was the largest block of instruction.
Oh, hands down. Yeah.
Interesting.
Far and away. And it was one of the few that people were still being, shown the door for failing. You could get around a lot of the other tests at the FBI Academy, or get retested or recycled and whatnot, but you couldn't shoot. There were precious few ways to save your career at that point. And I will tell you, I think of myself as a pretty decent firearms instructor. I thought I was a better firearms instructor when I got there, than I actually was. But I worked beside some absolute giants, just guys with insane credentials. It's made me look like a piker, and who could just absolutely shoot lights out. So it was for me, it was a graduate school education in firearms instructing, working with those guys up there. It was awesome. For people like us, it was candy store time. Ammo was not an issue, right? You wanted to get somebody to train, and this from your own experience. You get to a certain point in your firearms kind of progression, and your instructor especially, it becomes more and more difficult to get people to train you, to come out and watch you and critique you. You find fewer and fewer people that are capable of doing that job to the level at which you need them to do it. That was never a scarcity at the FBI Academy. There were some great guys, and I would say, you know what, I'm redoing my draw. Can you come out and watch it for me? I could get world-class instruction from guys who'd been doing it at that level for decades. That being said, what did we teach there? The new agents had to be taught how to shoot, right? They had to be taught. You had to assume that they didn't know what they were doing, didn't know which end of the gun the bullet came out of, and get them to a minimal level of competence so that they could walk out the door with a gun on their hip. Which is a fairly tall order given the amount of time we had. I mean, we certainly had more time than anybody else, but we had a very set curriculum, and the curriculum worked. I mean, frankly, the only people that I ever saw fail while I was there that we couldn't save were people with test anxiety, right? People who just got there, and when you've seen them, when the timer goes off, they just fall apart. The day came when they had to put the needle on the record and just couldn't do it. Just the pressure just got to them and they fell apart. And those folks, sometimes we could save them, a lot of times we couldn't. And I didn't feel terribly bad about that on sort of a philosophical level. I mean, individually, you're like, oh, gee, I'm sorry, Kent. Well, it doesn't make you a bad person, but you just can't do this job, right?
Right.
So there's the door. Yeah, you felt bad in that regard, but
there's always the ATF.
There's always the ATF. That's harsh. But on a philosophical level, my attitude was better to find out here
Right.
that you can't pull the trigger when you need to than when some 300-pound methed out biker is trying to crush your skull with a tire iron at 2 a.m. in an alley. It's better for you, better for everyone. So let's just have you wander on down the road. Not every job is for every person, right? I'm never going to be the powered forward for the Bulls. It's just not going to happen. I'm just too short, and I can't play basketball to save my life. It doesn't make me a bad person in my mind. So we had to teach that basic level of competency as part of the academy experience and get them to a certain point. And that took up enough of our time that training them on gunfighting was very, very difficult and just wasn't in the curriculum. You could slip it in here and there, but that's not really what you need if you want to teach people how to gunfight. We also taught in-service agents. They would come down for qualifications on our range sometimes. We did have one course that wasn't taught through FTU. It was taught by our practical applications unit on gunfighting. That was actually a really good course, and I took that course, and I liked it a lot. It's called Street Survival. So for your young law enforcement officers out there, if they get a chance to go to the FBI Academy and take the Street Survival course, I highly recommend it because that's a really good gunfighting course. We had a FTU alumni that went up to Washington field office and set up what he called Gunfighter Academy, and that was a really good course. But he had more time and more support up at the Washington field office than we had down at the academy. I tried to make some positive changes in that regard when I was there, but anybody who's ever worked in a large bureaucracy will tell you how difficult that can be. If you've worked in a large government bureaucracy, you really get an idea how difficult that can be. I tried very hard. I decided, I'm going to pick one issue, and I'm going to fix this one issue. And my issue is going to be the hackathorn fumble, right? So the switching the mags out at the gun, okay? Time, space, and distance allow you to, basically top off your gun, okay? Because what we were teaching was you're shooting bangity, bangity, bang. All of a sudden, time, space, and distance allow. You've got half the magazine left. So what we taught was go to the belt, retrieve the magazine, dump the magazine in your gun, insert the fresh magazine, put the other magazine away, come back to the gun, and resume the gunfight. And of course, I was like, hey, 1999 called from IDPA and said, give us our magazine change back because that's not how we need to be doing this. And of course, what I got was pushback from other senior guys who were saying, well, that's what I learned in the Oklahoma State Police Academy in 1985, and that's how we're going to do it. I'm like, dude, let me explain to you how this works. That's great if you're using a 1911 and it's 1987, or you're using a Bren 10 and you're on the set of Miami Vice. We ain't there. We're using double stack mags, and we've got these little freaking Ewoks running around here with these tiny little delicate paws. They cannot hold two double stack magazines in their paws at the same time and operate with any dexterity. Oh, by the way, how are we teaching them to do an emergency reload? Dump the mag, go to the belt, insert the mag, come back out to the gun. Let's teach the same thing. Remove the magazine, insert it, hang on to it, retrieve another magazine, insert, and get back in the fight. It's the exact same set of movements with the addition of grabbing it. So I had all kinds of logical arguments that you guys could make without listening to me. And we went round and round and round. And every time we get a loggerhead, I'd say, okay, let's you and me go out to the range and put it on the timer. Let's try your technique and try my technique. Let's see how that works. Forgetting for a minute that we're vastly better shooters than our average student that we're teaching. Let's just go out and put it on the timer. And nobody ever wanted to put it on the timer, which told me I was right? At least that's how I interpreted it.
Right.
So 5 years, I jousted that windmill, and my quixotic fight I lost. To my knowledge, they're still teaching the hackathorn fumble, and that was one minor little thing I wanted to fix. Let alone let's implement gunfighting instruction. So never won that fight.
There's a lot of industry scuttlebutt. There's a couple famous trainers using FBI HRT standards and shooting. So listeners, audience folks, like it's fashionable in the firearms training sector, even in the civilian firearms training sector, to number one, model training after law enforcement and military. It's more recently fashionable, last 2 decades or so, to model training after competitive shooters who are rips snorting awesome with guns. That's not a new idea. Some guys would want to convince you that was a 5-year new idea, and TC over here's IDPA numbers like A100 002 or whatever the fuck. So like, shut up. You ain't the first dude to go compete and then shoot together. But one of the things that will often happen is to demonstrate a baseline of proficiency rather than having a student shoot the Kent Howard consequences standards, which a federal judge in Arizona is going to go, who the fuck is Kent Howard and what the hell are the consequences standards? Everybody knows who the air marshals are. Everybody knows who the FBI is. Everybody knows who California Highway Patrol is, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of times what will happen is you'll see civilian firearms trainers using law enforcement and military standards as their bellwether for student proficiency. Recently, FBI HRT has been on that list of like, oh fuck, dude, you can run an FBI HRT standard. You must be somebody. What was the delineation in the Bureau between all the different units and their shooting capabilities, qualifications? Were you teaching all those folks? Were you just teaching the Nats and the regular officers, all that kind of stuff?
We would teach anybody that would show up, frankly. But it was very, very important, and I understand why, that as an instructor cadre in the FBI, specifically as an instructor cadre at the FBI Academy, that we all spoke with one voice, right? There was a standard, there was a way to teach at the FBI, and whether you agreed with it or not, whether you liked it or not, you taught our way. And I get that, right? You got to,
right?
You take the king's salt, you do the king's job, right? So I was fine with that, even though, like, for example, the Hackathon and Tumble disagreed with it vehemently, but I taught it because that was the coin of the realm. I have long been of the opinion that if I teach you how to do math, it doesn't matter what the test I give you looks like. If I'm testing you to what you know, you're going to be able to do it, right? Yeah. So if you can shoot bullseye, then I can give you any kind of a bullseye accuracy test, and you'll shoot well. If you're a timed fire guy, I can give you any timed fire test, and you'll do well. You know, the interesting thing about your consequences is a combination thereof, right? It's a bullseye course on the clock. And people in both of those camps don't often train in the other camp, which I know you know. So that's what makes it difficult, right? And that's great. I think that's great. The problem that I saw a lot in the FBI, and I think I see it a lot in other trainers, even in the civilian world, is teaching to the test. You know, they come up with their cool guy TC Fuller standards test, and then they train you to that test. And so then when you show up, you can't shoot it well. And after I spend 2 days teaching you how to shoot it well, the last day you shoot it well and you get a little nifty certificate suitable for framing, and you go, wow, I'm a TC Fuller black belt ninja operator cool guy. All right. Well, does that mean you can shoot? Does that mean you can fight with a gun? Maybe. I don't know. So I'm not going to say we paid a lot of attention to a lot of the standards. The FBI has a thing called the Possible Club, and that's kind of a 50-yard and in test. That's as much a math test and a memorization test as it is anything. But if you shoot it, you get your name on a wall at FBI Academy, and it's there in perpetuity. So that's kind of cool if that's your thing. I was always of the opinion about law enforcement qualification courses is that they're not designed to keep you alive in a gunfight. And that includes the FBI test. That includes the HRT's test. It's not what they're there for. A qualification course, as administered or as deemed worthy by a law enforcement organization, is designed to insulate the parent organization from lawsuit, right? If I get killed and I knew the standard and I shot to the standard, the agency can say, well, that day he just lost. Or worse, I go out and I shoot it at Felon Hauer and I hit innocent TJ, the organization will say, well, it's clearly his fault because he was trained to standard. Well, here's the fun fact. The federal government says you have to, as a law enforcement agency, you have to have trained to standard. It does not say what that standard is.
Right.
So think on that for a minute. Kent, you have to shoot to standard. You have to have a set of standards and you have to shoot to them and then you can be a cop.
What's the standard, boss?
Well, hey, it's the Kent Hauer standard.
Right.
So we changed the FBI's pistol qualification course while I was in the FBI. And I was the principal firearms instructor in Albany at the time they were making the changes. And so I got, they asked me among, all 56 different agents that had PFI jobs around the Bureau, what do you think the new qualification course should look like? And I said, well, I think it should be 10 rounds in 10 minutes from 10 yards. And they're like, the hell are you talking about? That's not, what are you talking about? I said, look, your qualification standard is meaningless to me. Literally meaningless. All it's there to do is to keep the FBI from getting sued. Like, it's a $13 billion a year agency. I could care less if you get sued, FBI, because you can afford it. Whatever amount of money it is, you can afford it. What I want to do is make sure that me and mine go home at the end of the day. So if you make it 10 rounds in 10 minutes at 10 yards, great. I can do 10 minutes of qualification, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, and then I can take all that extra ammo and all that extra time, and I can teach these people how to fight with a gun, how to win a fight with a gun. I can teach them how to win an entangled fight with a gun. I can teach them how to win a fight at 50 yards with a gun. I can teach them how to run away with a gun, how to run two with the gun. I can teach them how to get in a fight in a bathroom stall with a firearm and win. I can do all the things that they need to know without getting bogged down in this, isn't it nice the FBI is indemnified against lawsuit silliness that you want me to worry about. So that largely fell on deaf ears too. So now I teach stuff like that, and I charge a lot of money for us to have that conversation.
So you've segued me nicely into what is my last question for the evening, right? Because we've done a nice little 2-hour jaunt here, and frankly, this just begets the point that we're gonna need to do a fucking TC Forward series. Congratulations, you've been reinvited because I ain't through all my questions yet, right? But this is as good a place to end it as any, and this stems from a conversation I have recircled with Brady a half a dozen times. And this is something I'm starting to ask my elder colleagues, to use your phrase in your book inscription there, that I'm gonna fucking lay down with tonight and snuggle. I'm asking my elder colleagues in the training community. Number one, and I'm not being rhetorical. I know the answer for you, but do you consider yourself to still be proficient with your handgun, TC?
Proficient. That's the key word in that question, to my mind. So I would say, depending on how you define proficiency, I would say yes. Would I say I'm still as good today as I was a decade ago? Absolutely not.
Right.
Absolutely.
But the quick, hey man, you got 5 seconds to answer. Are you still proficient? Yes or no?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Yeah. I would share that sentiment because you passed the Kent Hauer Awesomeness 3000 mustard and mayo sauce test. You did quite handedly.
I came off that with an inordinate amount of pride in myself for having set the record to that date, at least for the iron sights. I was pretty happy with that. I didn't think I would be as happy about that as I was.
Well, you certainly gave a good account of yourself with a pistol, and
not too bad for a chubby old white guy, huh?
And there you go. Right. Here's my question though, because I'm starting to ask this of Brady. I've got a guy by the name of Hirsch Gooden, who is Range Master Instructor number 11 or whatever the fuck, right? Who's on my cadre now. Gentleman's in his 70s. Okay, so those of you elder statesmen, gun dudes who could still run the guns, there are plenty elder statesmen, gun dudes who, quite frankly, ought to stick to the pens and the computers and probably should not be running guns anymore at least from a demonstration perspective. You know, I have all the respect in the world for you if you want to tell me about your experience. But if you can't show my student the thing, or if you can't show me the thing, then it's lost its relevancy in that moment, right? Like if you can no longer do to any degree. Now you know, you've got the whole fucking Bill Belichick never was a linebacker, but boy, did he make some kick-ass fucking linebackers. There's that argument, right? To me, though, I wonder as I look at guys like yourself that have maintained a level of pretty superior proficiency. How the fuck do you maintain it decade after decade after decade after decade? Because I'm going to be frank with you. I just got that shit about 11 years ago, right? I just got a level of proficiency. I've maintained and my trajectory has been cliff facing upward, right? Like discovering and learning and getting better and kicking ass. And here a couple of years ago, that fucking cliff upward all of a sudden started to kind of sort of, you know, the stock price started to level out a little bit, right? And I'm looking now at a stock price that seems to have leveled out to a degree where I'm about as good as I'm gonna be. I'm not saying I can't learn. I'm not saying there's not somebody who can show me something. I'm just saying on the aggregate, you're not gonna do much better than I'm doing with what I've been given in physical gifts, eyesight, whatever. I'm not saying I'm the best. I'm not going to give Robbie Latham a run for his money anytime soon. That's not my point. My point is I may have reached most of my potential.
Yeah, I wrote a thing on social media here not too long ago about that very topic.
So now I'm staring at trying to be you, right? No. Like not higher than that, but hey, man, here's a guy in his middle 50s or low 60s or middle 70s or mid 80s. Right. I know. So here's a guy in his mid 50s, right? I got 20 years ahead of me at trying to maintain that level of skill. What the hell does that look like?
Well, you know, there's a couple of things that I would chime in on this. I mean, one, it's all a compromise. It really is. Let's get a little philosophical real quick. The only commodity any of us really own is time, right? Yeah. We trade our time on this planet for things we want, money, affection, whatever. So you got to figure out what's important to you, right? In my case, I will tell you I made some bad strategic decisions in that regard. I prioritized work and I prioritized shooting over things that I should not have prioritized over. And it cost me. All right. You have a wife that you love. You have a son that you love. They're going to be people that you're going to invest time in happily. Well, that's less time than you can shoot. So you say right now you're kind of at the best you're ever going to be. You could be better if you made different decisions, right? But they're just not decisions you're willing to make. And I get that. I'm in that exact same boat, right? I mean, there came a point where I had been training, competing all over the country. I was spending all kinds of money on it. Went to the Nationals a couple of times. The first time I drove there with Andrew Bronca from the Law of Self-Defense, that was quite a tale. Drove all the way across the country to get our asses handed to us. But, you know, you're making those investments in time and effort to get to that point you want to get to. So you've got to understand that's going to change over time. All right. It's whether we're talking day to day or year to year, your son's going to grow. He's going to have different demands on your time. Your wife is going to, if you're really, really lucky, she's going to mature and progress through life in an arc similar to yours. And you'll stay, you know, in one another's orbit. And the worst thing that can happen is what happened to me and my first wife is that we aged and matured and we went in different directions. That's just not sustainable. So if you're lucky, that'll happen, and you've fashioned a life for yourself that encompasses time on the range, right? I mean, that's a big part of your bread and butter. I don't know if it's entirety of your income, but it's enough that you are legitimately going to work when you go to the range, which I will say, by the way, for those who are listening, that fundamentally changes your relationship with your fun time shooting when it becomes a job. It really does. It sounds like a great job, but it becomes a job. It's a job. So you're going to, I think, be able to circle this range lifestyle for a long time until you don't want to anymore. And it sounds like you've gone through a couple of career changes in your life that may come to pass again. It's just kind of hard to predict. In my case, things have changed. I got into academics. I really wanted to get my master's and my doctorate. Well, that took time. It took time off the range. Happily, as both of you gentlemen know, and most of your listeners know, dry fire is a thing. And I will tell you, you know this anecdotally, I will tell you that the research backs it up. 15 minutes is about the limit of an attention span, a productive attention span for an adult learner. So if you can do 15 minutes of dry fire in the morning, 15 minutes of dry fire again in the evening, and you can do it consistently every single day, you won't just maintain proficiency, you'll get better. And you know this from the dry fire stuff that you've done. In my case, it's gotten to a point now where I'm doing 15 minutes of dry fire every few days. I'm getting out to live fire monthly, if I'm lucky, which is good because that means I kind of have a lifetime supply of ammo. So that's kind of nice. But you also know, and I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but 90% of the stuff you need to practice, you can practice in dry fire to maintain your skill abilities. And then if you can go out and live fire on a regular basis, you'd be surprised at how sharp you can keep that knife, if you will. Distance learning has become a thing across the educational spectrum. It's being embraced by the firearms community. So, the idea that you can record yourself shooting and send it over to TJ and have him critique you, that's not an odd thing to say.
Oh, that's always fucking fun.
Right. But I mean,
TJ's great at doing that.
But you see what I'm saying, right? He's a quality guy. He's qualified to do it. And you have a level of comfort with one another. You can say, hey, dude, you're really screwing that up. Yep. And you're not going to be insulted. You're not going to take your ball and go home. And, screw you, I'm going home. That's not going to happen. You can get some productive feedback from a close friend who will provide that for you. So these are all things that I think can help you maintain a level of proficiency long term. And also, I think the idea that seems to have been propagated throughout the law enforcement, certainly through the gun community, is that your capabilities are either going up or they're stagnating, or they're going up or they're dropping. I would say it's not that sharp. I would say it's more like you've got a band that you exist in. It's called a band of excellence. And at some points you're high in that band of excellence, and other points you're low. It's like a wave. And that's
a way better analogy. I'm going to start using that.
By all means.
That's more accurate.
It really is. And what you really want to do is raise that band.
Yep.
Right? So even when your worst day in that band is still going to be better than most people.
You're not pushing the ceiling. You're just bringing the floor up.
Right. And the other thing I think that we lose sight of in the training community is there is a good enough, right? None of us, we all focus on the better and the best, and we chase that guy. And, Dan Brady goes out and shoots an El Cap, and he shoots it in 3 seconds clean. And I'm like, well, geez, the best I've ever done is 8 seconds clean. I gotta do what that guy does. But and that's great. I think it's great to have high goals. I think it's great to do that. I also think it's important in the context of the question you just asked is to realize if I can draw my weapon and put a round in an 8-inch plate in 2 seconds or less from concealment, I am better than 98% of the bad guys in the world. I just am, right? If that bad guy, and I can tell you from having dealt with bad guys, I knew, look, dude, if I can buy 2 seconds off you, you're smoked. You're done. And that's if the gun is under my jacket in my holster. If my gun's in my hand, how much time do you need to put a round in an 8-inch plate at 7 yards, Kent? Half a second?
Right.
Okay. And you think well, TJ does it in 0.4 seconds. Crap. I got to do it in 0.4 seconds. Well, what's the reality? If you and the bad guy decide now we're going to do this, it's a quarter second for him to make the decision we're going to do this. It's another quarter second for him to start to do something. Right? So if all you need is a half a second, it's really going to come down to when you decide to make it happen. The best he's going to do is half a second. And more than likely, it's going to be a second, 2 seconds. Well, I will tell you sitting here right now, having seen both of you gentlemen shoot, if we's going to fight with guns and we're within 10 yards of each other, I'm not giving you 2 seconds because it won't be a fight. It'll be a shooting. Right?
Right.
If I give you 2 seconds, you're going to smoke me all day, every day.
Yeah.
Is that good enough? I'm not saying stop training. I'm saying you can at least acknowledge the fact that, yeah, I'm going to beat 95% of the bad guys out there on a level playing field. And frankly, if I'm fighting on a level playing field, my tactics suck.
Right. Oh, that's fair.
Yeah.
I just think of it as a thing where I guess the best analogy is fitness, right? Like these guys, you see guys well into their senior years, they're still working out and still pushing it. And you just look and you go, holy fuck, where is that fire? Like that fire stays lit, man. Like you got to keep that fire lit. And it's interesting to me that I recently finished the master instructor thing with Gibbons.
Congratulations.
And well, thank you. But my point is actually about Tom watching, because we know what it's like to run a gun class, right?
Oh, yeah.
This guy's in his 70s and still running a gun class.
But there's a different perspective that he brings to it. This isn't a chore for him, right? This is a life.
No, that's my point. That's actually my point. The fucking fire's lit on that dude.
Yeah. But I mean,
that dude still got up in front of that class and was like, hey, I don't know what that shit was today, but it was garbage. Like literally, like there's still a fire in that man. That man has been doing this for 50 fucking years.
But that to him, I'm sure if you asked him, he's not going to say it's a fire. He's just going to say, this is what I do. It's who I am.
I asked him on this show, and I've in person had a conversation, and much to my point about the people that are in really extreme circumstances in life, and just like it's like they're taking out the trash. It doesn't compute in the moment, and I don't know what it is about me and this existential thinking recently, but I've stepped outside of myself a little bit and looked in, evaluate myself as a dad and a husband and a business person and all this shit. But I've stepped outside and looked in and been like, you're an extraordinary human in a lot of weird ways. And you should maybe recognize that just for a half a second. Like not necessarily extraordinary, like literally extraordinary. Like I'm fucking weird, right? People don't do the things we do.
No, but there's nothing wrong with taking satisfaction in that. There's nothing wrong in recognizing, hey, you know what? I'm pretty good at that. There's something wrong with it when you say I'm pretty good at that. I don't have to try anymore. Well, that's a different attitude, right?
Yeah.
But to look at, to take a step back and to evaluate and be satisfied with where you are. And take pride in what you've accomplished and where you've come from, especially because, I've said it in my books before, I'm the only one who's ever been present at every mistake I've ever made. Right? Yeah. I know every single screw up I've ever made. Nobody else does. And I ain't talking. But you do, right? So you have, better than anyone else, a perspective on your success, right? So you can look at that without filter, provided you have the mindset to do so, and take pride and justifiable pride in, I know I started at this. I know I made these huge gaffes along the way, and I'm here now. And this is a pretty good spot. There's nothing wrong with that. It only becomes wrong when that becomes a limiting factor rather than a motivating factor, at least in my head.
That's a really solid answer. I've worked this out over a lot of whiskey by campfires and next to ranges and with all kinds of different humans. And we're all basically saying the same thing in our own version of English. But it's pretty neat. I find it neat that men over decades and women have all come to this kind of same realization in this one little cottage industry. We talk about this like it's an industry, like we're the fucking oil industry or something. There's like 11 of us and our buddies. Like it's not this huge. We talk about the gun industry. It's like, dude, it's like 20 rednecks and 2 vans and a Frank. Like there's.
Yeah, what was really, it came up at the last class I took with you? Is the gun industry revolves around the same $1,000 just going around in a circle? Yeah,
it's the same. It's the same $30,000. I just get to hold it this month.
Right. Yeah. It goes round and round.
Yeah. No, that's a great answer, man. I appreciate that perspective. that was my own this has been a great interview, and you've given awesome content to our listeners, but that one was for me, if we're being real, right? So I appreciate
tell your students, right? If you've got a question, there are other people in the class that have that same question.
Absolutely, man, for sure. So look, guys, this is getting to be promo time, right? It's time for TC to give you the Dewey Decimal System on where you can find his books. And it's time for him to tell you about his consulting and how you can reach him if you're how do I put this? If you're the kind of person who needs firearms training and needs the fucking world to know that you didn't get firearms training, wants it to be your business and nobody else's business, and wants a concierge level of effort that is beyond the capability of the average firearms trainer, you ought to look up Horse Group. You ought to look up TC. And I could co-sign the guy from the perspective of a fellow educator, just by talking through this stuff with him. And I could certainly co-sign him as a shooter because he shot my shit real well. So, for what that's worth, there's my humble promo, right? All we ever do is try to sell other people's gun classes on our fucking gun training podcast. Dumbass.
Well, thank you, Ken. I appreciate it. The easiest way to find my books. I'm sorry?
I said just get after it, man. Do it. Promo yourself.
Yeah, the easiest way to find my books is tcfuller.com. I finally got that website up and running. My books are available, I found out this week, at Barnes & Noble. They're available at Target, or barnesandnoble.com, target.com, amazon.com. If you're in England, they're in Foyles, I think, has them on their website. I was kind of surprised to know that was the case. Or like I said, you can hit tcfuller.com. If you're looking for high-end, bespoke firearms training, thehorseGroup.net is where I would send you. And we can set you up with the type of high-end private or semi-private lessons that the Horse Group specializes in. All my instructors are former FBI agents, although I do have one former Burlington cop that's been insulting me all night on chat, who's trying to get a gig. We'll see if we can make that happen or not. He's straighten out and get his mind right. But we're trying to kind of expand that a little bit. Also do security consulting work off of there. We do research off of there. I've gotten involved in a couple of interesting research projects since I retired, so that's been kind of fun. But tcfuller.com will find that stuff. If you want to read more about painting over rust, you can go to paintingoverrust.com. That's out there as well. So if you can't find me, you're not looking very hard. I'll say that.
The book titles are Painting Over Rust and No Safe Alternative.
That is correct. Both of which are available on my website.
Very cool. Thank you so much for gracing us with your presence one more time. I appreciate that. Please accept our humble invitation to do it again, because we don't have to. And I just, guys, I got to tell you, this is. I made this post after kind of like reading I just kind of sat down. I didn't have a lot of time today, but farting around with those books, and I'm looking and I'm going, how the fuck did I get to be buddies with a former FBI agent / doctor guy, right? And how in the fuck did that come through Apache Solutions of all places? like the criminal element of Indian ne'er-do-wells in North Carolina, the gun training biker gang turned me on to the former Burlington cop, who I didn't know when I was in fucking Vermont. Like the Delta overlap bell curve on times Dan Brady could have pulled me over for doing dumb college student shit in Vermont was pretty high. And yet, no personal interactions until I meet him in North Carolina, goddamn Lina of all places, right?
The world is a strange place, my brother.
The place is this pursuit, this training and the podcast and the business and the friendships. It always really intrigues me as to how this stuff comes about. And if I'd 10 years ago, somebody had been like, you know what you're going to do? You're going to interview this dude on your podcast tonight. And I've been like, you're fucking on drugs. I'm not going to have a podcast. Oh, yeah, your Chat GPT AI generated best friend is going to be doing it with you. And he's not real, but everybody thinks he is, and all this stuff. Like, nobody would have ever believed any of this. I just found it interesting.
Here we are.
You know?
I'll tell you what, the next time I come on, we'll talk about anything you want to talk about. We'll talk about the fact that I ran the bulls in Spain. We can talk about the time I bribed some guards and climbed one of the pyramids at Giza.
All right. So here's the deal. We're going to have you and Brady on, and we're going to do an episode called Stories That Are Probably True.
True or untrue? You make the call.
We're going to do stories that are probably true. TJ,
episode 140, episode 145. One of the guests is lying.
All right, let's work on that.
I'm in.
TJ, what a freaking night, man! What?
I've just been sitting here.
Just like,
it's
crazy, isn't it?
I'm not the fucking doctor. I'm the last person that needs to be speaking up in this relationship. Now, TC, I always enjoy your friendship, your company. You're just a great dude. Yeah, certainly somebody that, and I'll be so bold as to speak for Kent and I on this one, but you are certainly somebody that we look up to, that we aspire to be like and emulate. Yeah, maybe not necessarily your shooting skills, but certainly your academic achievements and your intellectual approach to things is certainly something that really speaks to a different side of the genome that makes up Kent and I, or in my case, the binary code that I've been written with. But yeah, man, it's always great to have you, and really appreciate you taking time, and thank you for the books. I look forward to getting my copies so that I can read them in advance of being in North Carolina in about
20 days.
Really? How long are you guys down here?
We'll be down there for 3. I'll be down there for 3 or 4 days. He'll at least be there for Saturday and Sunday to teach. We're redoing the same thing, right? You're welcome to come out again if you'd like.
Well, I'd like to come out. If I get a chance, I'd like to at least come up and shake hands, maybe break bread.
Socialize, my brother. You don't have to ask. If I'm in a city near you, just show up and say something. That
sounds good. I just got to figure out the dates and the times, and we'll see what we can make happen.
What is it?
I just want to put you. I just want a jar big enough that I could put you and Dan in, and then shake until you start fighting.
It's so funny because back in the day when Dan was a brand new baby cop, last story, and we'll let it go. He was constantly, trying to get out and shoot with us, and we just put him through the ringer and wouldn't let him. It's all in the book. But Dan figured out pretty quickly, I want to fight with TC because I'm good at fighting, and I just want to get him on the mat. Now, mind you, I paid for my undergraduate degree by teaching karate, so I'm not really anathema to getting in the ring and fighting with somebody. But there was no way I was going to get in the ring with Dan because he's bigger than me, he's younger than me, and he just wanted to fight, right? It wasn't going to be a points game with Dan. It was going to be, I'm going to hurt this mother. And I was like, not today. To this day, I have never gotten into physical altercation with Dan. And I will say at this point in my life, I never plan to, because he'd just chew me up and spit me out.
That's an abnormally big human.
Yeah, and it's an abnormally big human who's been hit a lot, so he's kind of used to it. Unless you're going to hit him with a medicinal 2x4, it's going to be a rough and tumble process to convince Dan to stop fighting with you, because he just likes to do it. There's just no way around it. And some people are built that way. That's fine. I could see it in his eye the first time that we met, because he was trying very hard to tackle me in a bank of snow. And it probably would have worked had I not been armed with a paintball gun and a lot of ammo. But again, moving over Rust to read all about it.
Nice.
Will do.
I love it.
Kent, what you got for us?
Oh man, I don't usually say this live. Usually I wait until after the show, but god damn, this was a good one. This came across pretty well. I'm really pleased with our work on this one. So, listen, everybody, www.greenmountaindefense.com/training. Our next appointment is Apache Solutions, Yadkinville, North Carolina, September 9th and 10th weekend. We'll be doing defensive pistol metrics down there. For those of you that missed it the first time, you missed out. Jump in. Your neighbors are already doing so. We'd love to have you. And then we've got a bunch of our private lesson calendar it's time to raise the rates again. I keep like, all right, it's time to raise the rates again. And then they still come. And what I'm really trying to do is get a Wednesday night off. But eventually it'll just get to the point where it's been ridiculous. So private lessons are going good, and we'll be moving indoor range time coming up fall and winter. So look out for some stuff over at Hummelstown coming up, and some stuff at the West Shore indoor range and all that. And then of course we got in reciprocal fashion, we got some cool hosting opportunities coming up. Dan Brady will be doing his low light, do it in the dark thing at West Shore Sportsman's the last weekend of September on Friday. And then he and Tim have 2 workshops, Saturday and then Sunday. So a little bit differently, those guys have been selling 1-day workshops and doing quite well with them. If I'm using the word workshop incorrectly, I'm sorry. That might be their 4-hour. But either way, they're breaking it down into 3 days that you can buy as individual days rather than buying a whole 3-day class weekend. So check that out on the Apache Solutions Eventbrite page. That's coming up at the end of September. And then at the end of October, Mr. Tim Herron and I will be teaching his instructor development curriculum at West Shore on Range 1A. I get to co-teach with Tim Herron, which is fucking incredible. What an honor that is. I really think he just wants me there so I could screw up the line calls and he can make fun of me, because I don't know the difference between center and middle, which is the same goddamn thing, by the way. But whatever, No, I'm super stoked and excited to be doing that. And we'll round out the year with a couple med classes and a couple handgun fundamentals, and that'll get us out of 2023 with a nice little ribbon on it. And then it's on to 24. We're not in 24 yet, are we? Is it 2024 yet?
Not yet.
Holy fuck! The calendar says it is, because I'm writing dudes' names on the hosted calendar for 24 and beyond. So it's nice to be busy. And Mr. Ramsey here is just going to keep choking people out the rest of the year. Right?
I'm gonna try.
I'm gonna try, Tater. You'll see.
Oh, you might beat me, but goddamn it, you'll know you've been in a fight.
There you go.
So
There you go.
all right, folks, that is all the time we have for this week. Thank you all very much for giving us your time on this lovely Friday evening. TC, once again, brother, really glad you made it to the show. Really looking forward to the books. If you haven't yet, go check them out, tcfuller.com. Check out his company at horaceGroup.net. Did I hear that correctly? horaceGroup.net. If you'd like to look out more of what they offer. In the meantime, folks, you're going to buy good shit. You might as well buy it from our affiliate links that support the podcast, greenmountaindefense.com/affiliate-links, as indicated down below in the screen. Or if you're listening on your podcast player, you can see the link in the description. Until we see each other again, God bless you all. Take care of each other. Get out and shoot.
Bye, guys.